Okay, welcome everyone to Shared Histories, continuing the conversation part 3. I'm going to make sure everyone is muted. I think everyone is automatically muted. Zoom has figured that out for us. Great. So, and feel free for all the panelists to unmute yourselves. So today's event is the third of 3 webinars that we at the Gilbo Center for Public History have planned in connection with our ongoing project to document the UL community's experiences of and responses to COVID-19 and the movement for Black Lives in 2020. This event also builds upon the university's week-long public dialogue in September on inequalities in our region. My name is Marissa Petru, and I am the director of the Gilbo Center for Public History and assistant professor of public history here at UL. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that those of us in Lafayette are on the ancestral land of the Atakapa Ishak, the Chitimacha, the Appaloosa, and the Abigail tribes. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and future. And I would also like to acknowledge the peoples of African descent who worked on this land when it was part of the Mouton family sugar plantation, Il Copal. For those of you who are only learning about the Gilbo Center for the first time, I'll just provide a brief summary of what we do. We're housed in the Department of History, Geography, and Philosophy, and we support institutions of culture and education, especially in dismantling white supremacy by drawing on our strengths as historians. We're very motivated by what has clearly become an urgent need to break silences, to unbury the knowledge, as student Delisha Daniels described it. At our webinar in September, community organizers and social justice advocates Dr. Phoebe Hayes, Skyra Rideau, and Corey St. Ewert spoke with us about the Black experience in Acadiana, both historically and in the wake of the murder of Trayford Pellerin, and provided us with an opportunity to brainstorm next steps to help move the needle towards social justice. Our discussion in October centered the student experience here at UL and thinking about the significance of intersectionality to conversations on social justice. Our panelists included Lauren Brooks, president of the UL NAACP, and Michael Griffin, president of the Black Student Union. Today's panel gives us the opportunity to examine socioeconomic insecurities in the region, both long-term and during our current crises. A panel of community leaders from nonprofit organizations and initiatives in Southern Louisiana will speak about food and social insecurities during the COVID-19 pandemic and how the current movement for social justice seeks to address socioeconomic issues. An alternative framing for this panel is building community in the time of pandemic. History major Trevian Ambroise, executive director of the big event, will moderate the discussion with representatives from Acadiana Regional Coalition on Homelessness and Housing, Acadiana Food Alliance, McComb Veazey Neighborhood Coterie, TownFolk, and United Way of Acadiana. I want to take a moment first to remember Jennifer Gindry, who is scheduled to be part of today's discussion as a representative for Acadiana Food Alliance. As many of you may know, Jen passed away suddenly earlier this week, and this is incredibly devastating news. For those of you who knew her, I'm sure you remember her as I do, as so warm and welcoming. And she was a student here, and she worked for years at the Center for Louisiana Studies, and she offered a lot of support, especially for public history work done by this department. For me personally, and what brings me to tears really when I think about it is she was someone who I met when I was first applying for this job, and she remembered me months later, and she reached out to me specifically and regularly, especially after I had first moved here and in my first year. She was always checking in to see how well I was settling in, and she absolutely loved Lafayette, and she wanted to make sure I loved Lafayette just as much as she did. And building a sense of community in many different forms was a big part of that. So I am so sorry that she is not here today for today's discussion. And I know that today's discussion was something that was important to her. And I know that we have more work to do, and she would support that work. So I'm very excited to hear from our panelists for today. And I'm so grateful to you all for taking the time to participate in this important discussion. So now I'm going to turn things over to our moderator, Trevian Ambroise. Trevian, who goes by Trey, is a junior history major here at UL. He is both executive director of the big event and an undergraduate research assistant at the Gilbo Center for Public History. He's especially passionate about researching the lives and experiences of the Black community in Southern Louisiana to counter a single narrative. So thank you, Trey, for moderating our discussion as you have moderated our last two discussions. And I turn it over to you.
No problem, Dr. Petru, and thank you for that introduction. And once again, everyone, welcome to Shared Histories, Continuing the Conversations, Part 3. So to start off our conversation that we're having today about the great work that's going on in our community, can everyone please introduce themselves and the mission of their respective organizations?
Well, I can go ahead and start. My name is Max Baquet. I am on the Acadiana Food Alliance and have been since its beginning in 2017. And our main mission is, to put it, maybe oversimplify it, it was to generate more connections in the local food community and industry. We saw a need for that, basically a lack of connections. There's a lot of beautiful things to eat in Southern Louisiana, and the fact that there even would exist a food desert didn't really make sense to the people that put this whole group together. And so that's one of the main things we work on. But also, you know, a big part of it all is the education, getting the information out, because it's you know, it's like until you're really in it, a lot of people have no awareness on some of the issues with local food specifically. And yeah, we're trying to get the word out, and so far so good.
I'll go next. My name is Carly Almabar. I'm the president and CEO of United Way of Acadiana. Our mission is to unite people and organizations with passion, expertise, and resources to create more opportunities for a better life. We do that by advocating and encouraging volunteerism and giving in our community, and we primarily focus our energies in the education, earnings, and essentials or disaster relief space.
Hi, I'm Dale Honoré. I'm with TownFolk, and we're a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the quality of life for our residents and business in the Laplace neighborhood by creating a strong network of positive and forward-minded thinking individuals and citizens, and partnering with local-minded businesses and organizations. We'd like to provide an ongoing education and partnership with local charities, and that promotes hands up, not hands out. We believe in helping people and the true value that comes with investing in our community. And hopefully that we can bridge the gap between education and education and volunteerism within our community.
Awesome, I can go next. Hi, I'm Tina Shelvin Bingham. I'm the executive director for the McComb Veazey Neighborhood CDC. The mission of our organization is to preserve the rich cultural and history and heritage of our community, the rich Creole and African-American heritage of our community, but also support revitalization and redevelopment of our community through similar to TownFolk, through volunteerism, activation of community networks, and getting strong partners to the table to help us develop plans that can help us move our community forward and improve the quality of life for all citizens of Lafayette Parish.
My name is Lee Rochelle, and I'm the Executive Director for the Acadiana Regional Coalition on Homelessness and Housing, which we use the acronym ARCH. We see homelessness and housing as two sides of the same coin. So our mission is to end homelessness, or to make it rare, brief, and non-recurring, while we look for opportunities to ensure that everyone in Acadiana has access to safe, decent, and affordable housing.
And I definitely would like to thank all of our panelists for giving up their time, and especially talking about the conversation that we're having today. And so our conversation will run very simply. I will ask questions to our panelists. The panelists will have an opportunity to offer answers or acts or reflections or stuff like that. And additionally, at the end, we'll have a portion of this webinar for question and answers. And so to begin our conversation, before we speak about the current projects of your nonprofits, can you share with us what this current moment of living during COVID-19 and of social change means for you, both as an individual and for your family?
We're all shy to go first. I specifically didn't want to go first, but I will. I think that, 2020, I think people make a lot of jokes about 2020, but I think, it's important that we all realize that it's a prolonged period of stress for a lot of people, whether you're, it's hard to say that anyone hasn't been impacted by COVID in some way, even if I think in the best case scenario, you've just had your social circles diminished, right? And then there's just all sorts of ways that it can go downhill from there. So, I think that's one of the biggest things. And I think one of the things that I've talked a lot, or Lee and I have talked about a lot in the course of the work that we do together, is that, we're going to see a prolonged need for the services that we provide at a scale that we've not ever experienced before. Some of that's already started, and some of it you just sort of look ahead to the landscape and try to figure out, if our communities are dealing with more stress and strain than we ever have seen, how are we going to continue to meet those challenges? How are we going to, in the case of our situation, how are we going to increase our donations to help people in need? And, when there's even more people who are not in a position to give. So I think those are the kind of the big stresses and strains that I would identify. Just, people have had in many, many, many different ways a very rough last 8 or 9 months.
I'll go ahead. And yeah, certainly agree with Carly there. It's been stressful, ups and downs, very much roller coaster. It's been difficult for Acadiana Food Alliance to meet schedules, so that there's been some internal struggles in that sense. I'll say personally, it got very scary very early on. Both of my parents, one of which is a physician, he caught it and gave it to my mom, and so that was scary to start out, but very happy to say that they recovered very well. And an interesting part of that too, aside from all the scariness, I am a small cattleman in Milton, Louisiana, and I raise cattle. I manage some soybean farms and up in Port Barry, and some sugarcane around here too. But the weather this year, even with all the hurricanes that were scary too, has been. We've had some of the best, agreeable weather to be a farmer and to be outside. I almost felt guilty some days that it was so nice to be socially distanced on my tractor I mean, we had like a real spring, you know, so I was able to find some silver linings, I guess. I guess everybody has to find something to keep them going. And yes, farming has been decent this year. On the grand scale, there's been some, you know, market issues, but soybeans are much better than they were last year with market issues. And I'm sure we'll get into it more, but the local demand, you know, being a person that sells meat, when that scare hit that you weren't going to be able to find meat in the stores, my business did very well. So, you know, again, ups and downs, but certainly I can't agree more with, it's been a stressful year, regardless.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Max and Carly. I think we all have the same sentiments. But for me, it's definitely been, if I can give it one word, it's definitely been an adjustment. Not just for me professionally, but I think for us just as a community as a whole, because now we're being kind of forced to figure out new ways of doing things that we've always been kind of accustomed and comfortable with doing. So it's been a huge adjustment. And then on top of, you know, just within BIPOC and African-American communities, dealing with the civil unrest and the racial unrest across our communities, already dealing with the COVID, we're in a spiral, a crisis spiral, I say, where we're trying to dig ourselves out of one hole, but we're already in a deeper hole. So with COVID coming along, of course, exacerbated a lot of the already stressed systems within our current society. So it forced a lot of food insecurity. There's a lot of housing insecurity now. So now we're going from not only food deserts, but, you know, are there really affordable housing deserts within our communities? And what do those things look like? And how do we start addressing that need within our community? So I think for me, especially with me, my family, it's been a strong adjustment. I'm thankful that I do not have children, but I pray for everyone who do have children, whose children are going to school constantly and being exposed to those elements. But then also having to adjust their own personal and professional life schedules to adapt to, you know, homeschooling now, where many people were sending their children to school. So it's been a big adjustment for everyone, but I'm hopeful, and I always try to look on the bright side of everything, that with adjustments always comes like new opportunities. So there's always opportunities for growth and for change. So it's just where we find those opportunities and how do we expand on those.
I totally agree, because now we have to find a different way of doing things, because most of our work relies on so much interaction with the community. And now that you can't really get up and personal and have a conversation with a person and try to get to the point or the gist of what they need or what they're lacking, it's always, you have to be at a distance, or sometimes they're not available because they're not feeling well and you don't know how to approach the situation. It's always changing from day to day, week to week, and you try to keep on top of everything that's going on. You know, you can't be involved with your elderly parents or your loved ones because you have that social distance, and that's very stressful. Not to mention, most of our clients are elderly and have health conditions, so we have to be careful of how we go about our day. It's just hard and it's stressful to not know what to do from one day to the next.
Yeah, I'll echo everything everybody else has said in terms of the need for adjustments. When the COVID levels in our community began to be prevalent, and the need for shelter and housing assistance started to grow and sort of exponentially kept growing. And I started thinking, oh my gosh, what are we gonna do about all this? You know, my days at work got very, 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 very long. I always say it's really bad news when I'm busy. That means things are going really bad for this community. And I've been very busy. And so individually, I mean, that's been hard. 16-hour days are hard. And then for my family, I have 2 young children, and my husband became a stay-at-home dad through all of this, and was often on his own to wake them up and put them back to bed because I was still at work. And so we're kind of out of that general schedule now, but for many months it was a hard struggle for my family just because I was gone most of the time. So I would say that's how it's impacted me individually and impacted my family. But again, on a kind of on the scale of things in terms of what Carly was referencing, I think that as we figure out how to move forward now, then the adjustment to what the social impact is for our community and kind of the reality setting in on people that we've lost and the loss to this community in terms of literal lives lost, but also then now as we go through, what are we going to do in terms of addressing the social needs and how will our systems be able to pivot to meet those and the great challenges we have in front of us. You know, as I go from conversation to conversation, everybody is soul tired, you know, not just like we could use a nap, but like soul tired. And so, you know, now we're being asked to take on some of the greatest challenges of our professional lives, probably for most of us, and we're just going into it exhausted.
Thank you for sharing that. And, you know, 2020, of course, is a year that it's going to be recorded, a year of great change, a year of great understandings and realities as we're all dealing with our own experiences. But yet, all of these experiences, as we're all seeing in here, they're all connecting, they're all sharing, they're all growing together. That exhaustiveness giving rise to hopefully something newer, something different. And so definitely, as we're speaking about the foodways of South Louisiana, as we all know, they have brought eager eyes and even eager mouths to the tables of South Louisiana, to the backyards of South Louisiana. Can you please offer a reflection on what these times mean specifically on the multicultural foodways and the access to food, and even, as you all stated, the access to housing means right now?
Well, now that the area over in Laplace, there's the closing of the grocery stores on that side of town. So most of our residents are elderly and they really can't get around now that COVID is here. They're afraid to take the bus. And so we have to kind of accommodate them where we can or help them out to where they can go to the store to get fresh produce or have it delivered to their home. And lots of times, you know, they're afraid of interacting with newer people. Like the delivery guy is new and they're kind of skittish about that. So there's a whole lot of things we have to overcome with this in order to get them back on a normal, I would say a normal track, a more constant track of seeing new people in their lives, because they're really not used to seeing new people. And once they do start seeing new people, they're kind of afraid. So we kind of have to bridge the gap between certain services and the elderly people to make sure that they're getting what they need in that area.
Yeah, I think for us in McComb Veazey, like feeding people was kind of our thing, you know, like that was the one way that we made sure that we engaged with our residents in our community. We were able to host events where we literally fed people. That was the goal, was to get you in here to talk about your family's food history, how your connection to food. And our project it stems from a food insecurity issue. McComb Veazey has been in a growing food desert for the last couple of decades, with the closing of the Albertsons, with the closing of the Piggly Wiggly store that became a Save a Center that was closed. And then Albertsons closing, now the Walmart. It just makes food insecurity in our community even more prevalent. And with COVID coming along, it just exacerbated the problem. And I know people on this call are familiar with the saying, when white America gets a cold, the Black America gets the flu. Well, I feel like we have COVID, okay? Like we all have COVID at this point, and we are all struggling in some way, shape, or form. But in particular, when it comes to dealing with African-American communities, BIPOC communities, low-income communities, you have to deal with issues of transportation and access to transportation. And how do those things move around the bus system? How adequate and efficient are those things? In many of our communities, and many people ride buses, ride bikes, there's no safe servitudes for them to be able to put bus shelters there for safety. And then on top of all of these things that people are struggling with just getting access to food, you have landlords and people who are also equally struggling because of this COVID disaster. But you have landlords who are coming into our community preying on people who are already going through struggling times. And in most cases, people are getting evicted. Most people are being threatened for their housing. And no one wants to live that way. And no one should live that way, because it's a basic human right to have access to safe housing. It's a basic human right to have access to safe, affordable food. But for some strange reason, we can't seem to get that right in our community or figure out how to start healing some of those deserts that we have in our community.
I'll go ahead and I'll say I certainly share some of the frustrations that Ms. Tina brought up. But I do want to point out one, and I can't say that Acadiana Food Alliance was really involved, but I personally was able to help out. I'm a very big fan of a local, I can't think of the best word to describe her. She's a force for sure, Kim Collada. And I met her with, I donate unused hay to a garden that she was running in Scott, the Earthshare Gardens. But her and Mr. Ardwin coming together to put together the Fightonville Fresh Farmers Market. I just can't applaud them enough. And it was a struggle in all kinds of ways for them, and it certainly still isn't easy. And you know, the COVID problems, of course, but also dealing with landowners, et cetera. But I've seen it continue to grow, really, because I've been fortunate enough. I kind of had an ongoing partnership with a property across the street, the Alamo, which is an artist studio kind of deal, and I would serve food there. So that, you know, that small part of Simcoe, you know, there's some really healthy local food coming out of that one spot, and there's so much more that needs to be done, of course. But you know, I think it's things like that are what give me hope, and seeing that it's, you know, that it's growing, it's getting more vendors and more attendees from that neighborhood. It's not tourists coming in to buy over there. They really have some local people, you know, participating in it and as well. But I'd also would like to point out another thing to applaud, because we certainly need more of them, is the neighborhood grocery store. And Mr. Bradley Cruz, who is part of the Acadiana Food Alliance, took a big risk and opened one downtown on Jefferson Street. And it's been a struggle for him, for sure, with COVID, et cetera. And you know, just it certainly is interesting to see, even in complicated times, you know, our grocery shopping habits are pretty set in stone. You know, people don't really want to change how they grocery shop too much. I'm discovering, and you know, to even get people to shop at a new store, it isn't as easy as I thought it might be. So yeah, there's a lot of still struggles out there, but you know, pointing out some of the more shining parts, I think is important. And yeah, big applause to Fightonville Fresh, because that's what we need a lot more of.
I think, you know, when I look at the question and think about, you know, there was something that Tina said, and I don't remember exactly what it was, Tina, so feel free to jump in if I don't get your intent. But, you know, in reflecting on COVID, I think what's interesting is because in part of the work of the Food Alliance and others, we've been talking about food deserts and food insecurity in our community, but it's kind of been for years, but it's kind of been more on the level of people in the know, I would say. You know, there's probably, if you just went and asked someone at the mall, what a food desert was. They might be able to guess from the words, but they don't really think about it. They haven't necessarily internalized it. And so in thinking about the broader discussion tonight, I think, I see some similarities on like health disparities. I think a lot of people maybe on this call pre-COVID might have been able to be conversant about health disparities, but maybe the broader community would not have understood that or would not have been able to talk about that. And so this is sort of looking, taking food and then comparing it to COVID, or taking the food question, comparing it to health inequities, and hoping that as we recover from COVID, that we're able to make these challenges a little bit more accessible to all the people in our community, so that these problems, they're not ever going to become easy to solve. But if more people understand them, I think they become just a little bit easier. And so that's, I think of that both in the context of food, but in the context of health disparities generally.
Well, I think one of the challenges we see from COVID is that we can't just, and Tina referenced this, you can't just throw a big event and have some food and have everybody, all the thought leaders come together in one room and figure it out. And so, we at South Louisiana, we cook and pull people together, and we can't do that socially, but we also can't do that in this thought leadership world either, or in the community education world, where we could do a big event to try to get people to better understand the circumstance and come up with some solutions. And so we would, I think that that's one of the ways that COVID impacts us. But in terms of the food insecurities, we within the homeless service providers have been really startled at the level of food need that we're seeing in our unsheltered population right now. Food providers like the soup kitchens across the community aren't able to operate, but for the same reason, you can't pull a bunch of people into one room and feed them. And so folks that are unsheltered right now have very little access to food. And the food that they need is very specific in that it needs to be shelf stable. They can't heat it up, they can't refrigerate it. And so it's there's a certain type of food that would be able to be provided to them, and that's not necessarily very healthy food either. Fresh fruits and vegetables would be healthy if they could be eaten raw, but those are not the things that we generally hand out on the streets. And so I think it's a challenge before us right now about how to address that specific food issue in our community.
Yeah. And if I can jump in really quickly to kind of respond a little bit to Carly's comment, just with some data that McComb Veazey has collected just from within our community. And as far as like the education of how people respond to food deserts and what a food desert actually looks like within the community. When you take it down to a layman's term for the people who don't speak food desert, that don't speak food insecurity, that don't speak health every day, these people don't really have the perception that they're doing without, because they've kind of been conditioned to the fact that you have to drive 2 miles to the Walmart to get your groceries, or walk 2 miles to get the groceries, or that this Burger King is the best fast food option that you have for you to be able to eat and sustain your family. There's no true healthy options. So we also have to look at as a community, like what's the perception that our community actually really understands about their housing needs, about their banking needs, about their financial needs, about their food, like how do they access those things, and what are they kind of sacrificing, just for the convenience of knowing that they can go run to Target, Target is not a good example for groceries. Not our Target, I'm sorry. It's not a good example for groceries. Southside Target, definitely. But it's one of those things you're conditioned, like Max was saying, that people don't really like to change their shopping habits. But if they don't know that there's other shopping habits, or the new shopping alternative may not be a good price point, might not have good price points for where they are as far as socioeconomic levels, then that's something that we really need to take into consideration as thought leaders in our community, of how do we educate the layman's man that, you don't have to settle for McDonald's or Walmart. we can try to get a grocery store here. And, I like Max, I applaud the efforts of Fightonville Fresh. Here in McComb Veazey, we actually created, we're actually piloting our pop-up markets here, the homegrown pop-up markets that happen twice a month here at the community house, and they're going to be moving in 2021 around the community too. So things like what we're doing in McComb Veazey, what Fightonville Fresh is doing, and what other organizations are trying to activate across the community are very important to help us continue to address food insecurity and housing issues.
Definitely. And once again, thank you all for providing that. Just thinking about this, education, access, organization, the work that y'all are doing. My own experience, I'm from St. Martinville. And so I remember, of course, having a garden in my backyard, or, going down the road and being able to buy watermelon or yams or okra from family members and stuff like that, or going to Delcom, going to get shrimp and stuff like that, that access to those fresh produce. But knowing that, of course, having that access, and then thinking about that, does everyone know about that access? Can people get to those places? And definitely, y'all answered my next question I had for y'all. And so just thinking about the overall pandemic, as we're just thinking about this experience right now, the pandemic has brought massive awareness to income inequalities in our community, as y'all suggested. On October 29th, the Advocate published that South Louisiana's, particularly Lafayette's, population of people experiencing homelessness has doubled due to a decrease of both jobs and space in shelters. Additionally, across the region, food drives and lines were organized on several dates in the spring, summer, and fall. So what role do you think the pandemic has played in stressing these much needed resources in our region?
I'll jump in here. The pandemic had a very direct impact on this region's ability to offer emergency shelter to those who were experiencing homelessness. We lost about 67% of our shelter beds across the region, mostly because of COVID precautions that needed to be put in place. So pre-COVID, the idea for shelter was you pull in as many people as you can under a roof, that way they're sheltered. That solves the problem of shelter. But with COVID, you can't pull that many people into one tiny space. And so having to space people out means you have far fewer options for shelter for people. We've also had a couple of shelters closed during this time. One was due to economic downturn and lack of donor support, that kind of thing. And so we can point directly to COVID for stressing the shelter system and creating the perfect storm. Of course, as our shelter system decreased capacity, there was an increased need from folks who were becoming homeless at an alarming rate. And that was primarily, at least at first, from this population of people that live kind of on what I refer to as the edge of homelessness all the time, very housing insecure, either doubled up, tripled up, moving from place to place, or paying their own way in hotels. So they weren't protected by the few protections that were put in place at the federal level or state level for eviction moratorium. They didn't have a lease that they could have a moratorium from eviction from. And so as soon as they missed that first paycheck and couldn't pay the next piece of the puzzle for the hotel, or couldn't pay their mom to continue staying with their mom or whatever, then their housing evaporated. And so then they became homeless, and at the same time that our system just couldn't even maintain what we had then. And so I point directly to the pandemic for the significant increase, as you mentioned, doubled across the region of people who are experiencing literal homelessness right now, where they're in places that are not meant for human habitation.
Sorry. Go ahead. Go, Max. Sorry.
Quickly, because honestly, I don't think I really have much to add here. I just wanted to thank you for that information. I didn't realize, and the reason being, I've been a happy hermit, I guess, in a lot of ways. I isolate myself for all kinds of reasons, I guess. But yeah, thank you for the bringing this awareness. Not that I engage the news too much, but yeah, this is not something that's been brought in front of me, how bad, but it makes perfect sense how it got to this point. But so yeah, thank you for sharing this information, because I am embarrassingly uninformed on it.
I don't think that's unusual, so don't feel bad about that. I think that it is something that our community hasn't wrapped their head around yet.
I would agree with that. I don't have much to say to add, other than I think many of us have just been in awe of the work of Lee and her team the last few months. Just, you know, they have coordinated a lot of help for a lot of people, and you know, their job has been harder than it's ever been.
And I also, whilst Carly's giving shout outs, I want to give a shout out to Carly and her team at United Way as well, because with them and the way they've helped activate organizations through the Acadiana VOAD and getting those resources out into the community. At first, when the COVID first started, we were on daily calls, I think, about COVID, and we were all learning and growing through this whole thing. So, and I think having that coordination of VOAD and VOAD, for those that don't know, it's Acadiana Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. So having that coordination and kind of that point of contact for all organizations to come and get some really good information and be able to put solid information out into the community was something very important. And Carly and her team were helping to fill gaps. So they were out delivering food, they were out recruiting volunteers. So when there were people that were falling in those cracks, they were making sure to fill those cracks for people. So I just want to give a shout out to Carly and her team over there as well. And Elsa, even though she's left United Way, but I want to give her a shout out as well, because she was very influential in that process.
And now it's helping Lee all the time.
Yeah.
Yes, thank goodness.
And I think too, you know, that's kind of every time we say things like that, you know, I want to make sure we always talk about we have a long road ahead too, you know,
Yes.
like that same work we've been doing the last few months. We got more time, more of it ahead of us.
Yeah, and I want to kind of expand a little bit. And obviously our homeless response system is struggling, a little bit broken, in that what do we do with this increased need and with this decrease in capacity, and how do we increase our capacity and try to figure out how to decrease the need and be able to respond appropriately to our community. But homeless providers can't operate in a silo, and so we have to really pull together across VOAD partners, across government partners, across faith-based partners. I think this is a time when we've needed and will continue to need so much in terms of collaborative efforts. And again, collaboration is hard under the best of times, and now we're doing it all through Zoom calls, and we're trying to you know, not have face-to-face meetings, which makes our effectiveness in figuring out solutions much harder at a time when everything's already hard. But we're still seeing people fall into homelessness at an alarming rate in our community, and seeing the impact on not having enough affordable housing. Hurricane Laura and Delta coming through our communities has impacted access to affordable housing, because people who evacuated from the Laura impacted areas or who had to leave Delta impacted homes within this region are renting homes in this area. And so the housing availability is very short. Again, the demand far outpaces the supply for our affordable housing. And we know that there are a number of people who were on the edge before COVID. They were barely hanging on with some of the assistance programs, unemployment, etc. Those jobs are not coming back at the rate that we need them to come back at fast enough. And so the systems of employment, childcare has been a huge issue for getting people back on their feet, because you can't go to work if you're at home with your kids. And how do you prioritize health and safety of your children, and communities that are already struggling are just being like, just keep getting all of the impacts are impacting them at much higher rates. And so it is a place where we have to look at equity work, and we have to look at justice work across multiple systems of care, and how we ensure that everybody has access to the various systems, and that the various systems are working together in hand and collaboratively across the different sectors, so that people don't fall through the cracks as they pass from one system to the next, trying to just make it work.
Well, and just thinking about this question, it led me to another question. What forms of policy do you think could be enacted? Not speaking about nationally or statewide, but speaking specifically regionally. What forms of policy could be enacted to create some form of change, or to continue that push for changes within our communities in regards to food insecurities, food deserts, housing, economics, stuff like that?
Well, I think I can maybe not speak to specific policies, but I can at least speak to kind of generally what I kind of have seen since there's a number of organizations and businesses who have activated and taken a more social presence, I feel, as far as, taking a real deep dive as far as what are they doing to, add to these issues within our communities. Many are kind of reevaluating like their own internal policies. And I think that's kind of where things start to really shift, because when the business and the corporation or the organization starts doing business a little bit differently, then I think we'll start seeing that cultural and society shifts as well. And as we start all shifting kind of our own kind of ways of thinking of things, or our own kind of learned or unlearning some bad behaviors, I think we'll definitely be able to start pushing things forward strategically. But for me personally, I definitely like to see more policies that really, from a city level, at the Lafayette local level, I really want to see like the Lafayette city government leader, one Acadiana, kind of put their money where their mouth is a little bit. And those organizations have stepped up to really take that deep dive, but to dive a little bit deeper and say, you know what, these things are needed, and we're going to be intentional about doing it. And making sure that we're bringing food deserts. We're minimizing food deserts by intentionally recruiting locally grown grocery stores, because maybe Whole Foods might not want to be here because our income isn't quite right. But there's a local grocer here, a smaller grocer who we may be able to support and get the need and the infrastructure that we have. So start looking at things a little bit differently and put more equity into our decision making, I think would be helpful.
We can take steps towards better access to affordable housing even at the individual level, for folks that are operating as landlords to just start looking at their application policies. So the barriers that people often get screened out for, in terms of income levels, in terms of credit scores, in terms of rental history, in terms of criminal background checks, all of those things. If we lower those barriers to housing, and even if one landlord lowers one barrier to housing, it helps us get folks moving in one at a time. Some communities do big educational pushes to help landlords understand why that's important to do. So certainly we could do that on a more community level. And I think right now we all have to look at one another with some grace. So there's been a lot of talk in our community right now about panhandling, and what are we going to do about that? And recognizing that that's our neighbor in need, and responding as such, rather than criminalization policies, things of that sort. So I think we have a lot of opportunity locally to adjust our point of view, and to see this as an opportunity to reach our hand out to our neighbors in need, and help pull them back up on their feet in ways that we do after other disasters. It is something that we pride ourselves on in Acadiana, that we are, helping our neighbors after hurricanes to muck out their homes and to rescue people off of roofs. And we do the things that are necessary to keep our neighbors alive and their property restored. And so COVID is a different kind of disaster, but it still requires us to just pull together as a community and to respond with grace and, help one another individual by individual, and also if where we can at a community level make those impacts with policies.
I think that there's so many topics that are, wrapped up in some of the issues that we've been discussing. So, housing policy and transportation policy and even not necessarily a policy issue, but how the philanthropic community makes its investments and which challenges it seeks to address. And I think that one of the things when you ask the policy question, one of the things that I think that, COVID potentially opens up is there's, and some of the folks that are here from an academic front, and I'm not an academic, so I feel even a little bit like a imposter using this term, but there's a policy concept called like an Overton window, which is like the range of acceptable policy solutions at any given time. And I wonder if COVID gives us an opportunity to have discussions that before COVID we wouldn't have been able to have, that wouldn't have been, just like we said at the beginning of the call, that it's changed, it's made food insecurity issues more real to people, it's made health disparity issues more real to people. Has that then also made policy solutions more real to people? And, Lee's the housing expert, so I don't want to pretend to know, but is there something that that Lee has, is there a policy solution that Lee has wanted for a long time or thinks that would improve our community's access to safe and affordable housing that may not have been possible a year ago simply because conditions on the ground were different? And so, I think that the challenge for those of us working in this space is, as Lee has said, as we've all said, we're so bogged down in the day-to-day that it can be really hard to pick your head up and think, how are we solving these problems? And what's the phrase, like, never waste a good crisis. There's no doubt that this COVID-19 is a crisis, and it's the opportunity to think in terms of policy change that could really make big impacts on our community. But we have to have the bandwidth to do it. And I think that's a huge challenge right now.
I'll say one more thing. I think that as it relates to COVID and equity questions and justice questions, and particularly as it relates to housing, but not just housing, the reason we don't have enough affordable housing goes back to redlining and lots of other historical policy issues that were wrong and never should have been there in the first place. And we have work to do to undo all of that. And so, and that's true in the housing arena, but that's true in every arena. And so how do we take a really hard look at the impact that policies have had and how we can step those back and repair damage done in those and set policies in place to do that equity work and to do that justice work. And Carly mentioned and Tina mentioned Elsa, and Arch has recently hired Elsa to help us specifically around equity and justice as it relates to housing and housing work in our area. And I think that nonprofits, government, faith-based, even for-profits have an opportunity to do some self-reflection about how they can contribute to that conversation in their own arena, their own sector, and what equity and justice issues have been in place that have negatively impacted equity and justice, and how we can undo that damage.
Mhm. And just to add to that, I think with adding to the new social consciousness of a lot more of our, people just out in the world, I think it's a great time to kind of echo what Carly is saying. Like, is this the right time to have those types of conversations where we might have been tiptoeing around it pre-COVID, but now, we've been slapped in the face with it, and now we need to figure out, do we slap back or do we just take it and keep on rolling? And I think this is especially for advocates and nonprofits that are really working in those spaces, for us really to amplify our voices as advocates for these needs and these policy changes that needs to happen. So I think that, while people are at different levels, because I think I've met people at different levels of their wokeness into like what's happening within the community. But as people activate, being able to provide them with safe spaces to be able to continue to advocate for the things that they're passionate about. You'll get the most passion out of people when they're first activating. So that's when you want to put, that's the people you want to put in front of the council to fuss about your policy issues. So I think it's something that we're all, especially as nonprofits, kind of learning, because before we used to kind of, I don't know about everybody else's organization, but we were like, please help us. And now you have people who are, self-activating, like, I've been thinking about this for years, and I've been waiting for a way to like get it out there. But really kind of standing in that and being receptive of those new activations and providing them with, safe, comfortable places that they can continue to advocate for the things that are important for our community.
Yeah, because sometimes I think that the city can do a little bit more within regards to the businesses pulling out of the Four Corner area. Just for example, like the Saber Center and Jace was a big blow to the area. Now people have to migrate so far just to do basic banking and grocery shopping. I think that they can just get out in front and kind of maybe give a little tax break here or there to businesses to keep them in the area sometimes. I mean, a few dollars up front can save a lot of hassle on the end, which is nice that they're redeveloping that corner where the old hotel used to be at, right there at Four Corners, where the Coca-Cola plant is, now that there's supposed to be affordable housing there also. So wait to see how that goes along. The construction is going really well there. And because, I mean, people are basically 3 paychecks from being homeless already. And with most of the jobs that are not coming back to the area. So some people had 2 and 3 jobs just to make their ends meet. And now we have landlords that really don't even understand the pressure that these people are under. And once they get behind on maybe a single month rent payment, they're like out on the street. So a lot of it has to do with education and sometimes maybe even a tax break for certain landlords to just incentivize them to kind of hold on to the tenants until things get a little bit better.
I just want to thank y'all again for educating me on this topic. As far as policy goes, it's not one of my favorite words. But again, I like to point out when things are done right, and it's not too far away from us, but up in Alexandria, I'm sure some of y'all are familiar with the Fresh Central initiative that was done with CLEDA. I love, well, one, they just have fabulous people working there, but they've got some great support from, that Central Louisiana economic development. And if LEDA, which it kind of looked like that was going in that direction, that we might get something like that specifically for Lafayette, but an organization like Fresh Central operating in Lafayette, I think would have just as much impact as they're seeing up in Alexandria and that area. So I don't know how they got that done. I don't know what the policy was, but clearly it's possible. So yeah, big applause for Fresh Central.
Well, and definitely, the work of nonprofits across our region, across our nation, across our world is certainly so vital. And the work that you all do in our community, especially, is so vital and so important, especially as we're speaking about what our community is facing today and what our community will face tomorrow. And so, while we all understand that the path forward is indeed long, how can UL students share in and support your work?
I'll give an easy answer that we have a lot of volunteer opportunities. And so if you go to unitedwayofacadiana.org/volunteer, we are right now helping, as I think somebody, either Lee or Tina mentioned, deliver food a few times a week to people either homeless or people impacted by COVID. But then we also have a lot of other volunteer opportunities that come our way. So I know oftentimes, for UL students, you guys are looking for an easy way to get involved just to learn more. And I think, sometimes that happens by doing volunteer stints here and there. So that would be my first easy recommendation. But the other thing that I would say, and I'm sure everybody else has a lot of great ideas too, would be like, I know several of the panelists personally, and I've enjoyed hearing from the others, like everybody, we all want to help people get involved too. So don't ever be afraid to reach out to someone who's doing work in the community and say like, okay, I want to help. How can I get involved? Because I promise I'll try to put you to work or try to find the thing that's going to motivate you and get you up every day to help serve. So don't be afraid to reach out. We want UL students involved in helping.
Yes, I agree, because just before COVID, we had a lot of volunteers from AmeriCorps. And on Saturdays, we would pack our groceries from Whole Foods and deliver to the neighborhood and the sick and the elderly people that were shut in or couldn't make it out to the grocery stores and things like that. AmeriCorps was really great about sending several students out every week to help us with our grocery pickup and delivery service. And it's been really wonderful having the volunteers, but now that COVID came, so we don't have enough volunteers anymore. So it gets kind of tough on certain people that has to keep going the same route over and over, because you can't really bring anybody new in, and people are afraid to do a lot of volunteer work with COVID going on. So you kind of have to again go back and educate them and see which way will make them feel safe enough to go out and help the community to volunteer, because a lot of people would like to go, but they're just so frightened.
Yeah, I think I would agree with the same thing. I'm gonna put both hats on because I am the executive director for the McComb Veazey Neighborhood, but I'm also the community development director for the Lafayette Habitat for Humanities. So I want to double down and say that definitely we can always use volunteers. Unfortunately, we are not accepting volunteers currently on our construction site, but we are accepting volunteers at our restore for the Lafayette Habitat for Humanities. So if you're interested in volunteering in that capacity with Habitat, please sign up through our service website. And then we're also going to be using, well, I definitely am using United Way's volunteer service as well. So McComb Veazey projects and volunteer opportunities will be listed on United Way's volunteer platform as well. But then we also have a number of things that are coming up in the first and second quarter of 2021, where we'll be going back out into our community and doing our third year survey collection. So we're going to be looking for students who are interested in possibly riding bikes and doing surveys throughout our community, but then also engaging in some safe and socially distanced survey responses as well. So there's always plenty of opportunity. We also have a community farm. This is also available as an internship. Students, all of y'all are welcome to come and intern with us. And just if you really want to learn and be ingrained in what's going on in the community, I would definitely encourage you to get involved in the things that we have going on. All of our meetings have moved virtually, so you can check out our McComb Veazey Facebook page and check out all of our community meetings that we've had over the last few months. And just get involved and plugged in. And join us at one of our markets. We have a third Sunday market coming up on the 21st of November. We love for you guys to come out and visit with us. We have Northside Vegan there. We have the Veggies on the Go, which is our vegan, which is our mobile food pantry that brings intentional fresh food and produce into the community. That's how we fight food deserts in the McComb Veazey neighborhood. So come out and support our community and support the local businesses that we're incubating in our market.
Arch also uses the volunteer platform that United Way has set up. So our volunteer opportunities go through that. We collect in-kind donations of furniture and household items. We're in the process of moving 291 households into housing. So that means we need 291 couches, mattresses, dishes, towels, coffee pots. So everybody it can, if you have 6 spatulas in your drawer and maybe you only have 2 hands, the other 4 could be donated. But the other thing I want to really highlight is that opportunities like this to educate and to share the reality on the ground, as well as some opportunity for thinking through creative problem solving and innovative solution generation, I think is something the university is maybe uniquely positioned to help do in our community, and pulling together cross sectors. And so, there's data work to be done, there's marketing work to be done, there's policy work to be done, there's some legal analysis maybe that needs to be done. There's lots of different avenues where students and or professors or the whole UL community could pull together to help us work across systems, and education just with the general community as well. And so panels and platforms like this are super helpful.
There's, I guess, the best way to describe with our organization right now, we're kind of in a restructuring mode. So I would say that unfortunately we don't have the volunteer opportunities like everyone else has going on. If I had to ask UL to do, well, I'll say this: they can certainly follow us on social media. We're really trying to focus solely on giving free advertising to the farmers, the markets, the restaurants, the distributors, the supply stores, basically all points in that map of the local food system. We're just kind of trying to draw attention to especially the ones that are really doing the hard work out there right now and are moving things along. So our social media is going to stay up. We have a good website, growacadiana.org, which we try and keep the most up-to-date list of local food focused businesses, but hearing everybody else's information, I think I would most strongly urge them to go volunteer with United Way or with Arch and help where they can on the housing, because I know everyone eats at UL, and if they can, find some local food, that they usually do, so that, they're doing their part there. Oh, I would want to point out, more on the administrative side of UL, y'all are doing some fantastic things with food waste. I've heard not too long ago. So applause for that. But yeah, for Acadiana Food Alliance, just keep us in mind and keep local food of course, in mind. But yeah, I think I'm going to start telling people to really start learning more about. This has been a very eye-opening thing on the housing for me. So I almost am switching my whole push. Local food is important, but yeah, you got to have a place to live too. So yeah, thank you all again for everything that you've taught me tonight.
And so once again, thank you all. And our next part is the question and answer section. And so if anyone who is a guest tonight, and if you have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or just place your question in the chat and me or Dr. Pt3 will read it to our panels. Dean Gilman.
So, Trey, your story about growing up in St. Martinville reminded me of a grant project that I'm sure that some of you were involved in. There were actually two related grants a few years ago. One was focused on recovering the foodways of Freetown and using historical research. And the other one, and they were connected, was focused on going into schools and educating students about the possibilities of urban farming and growing your own food. And I went to a couple of the groundbreakings of these, and it was just amazing. I mean, I guess in the short time since you were a kid in St. Martinville, that much of that knowledge has been lost because these kids, the idea that you could grow your own food and nourish yourself out of something that you grew on the school property or in your own backyard was a radical suggestion for them. And I mean, these schools we were at were in zones that had been identified as having food challenges. But that part of it is the same from one end of the socioeconomic spectrum to another. Somewhere along the line, we made that trade-off, and young people are shocked by the suggestion that you can just feed yourself out of your backyard. So I'm wondering, I'm sure some of you were probably involved in those grant efforts, but do we still have ongoing efforts to introduce this into our local schools?
So this is a topic that I probably know just enough to be dangerous about. So if any of the panelists know more than that intro, I'll talk a little bit, and then if anybody wants to chime in a little bit, the LPSS does have a you know, obviously they have a nutrition program, and then they have a woman named Celeste Finney, I believe, who runs some of the local kind of gardening efforts at each of the schools and does a lot of work with the 4-H program. And every year, you know, I know I've participated in an opportunity where they basically get the kids to do cooking competitions with food that they've grown at the schools, right? And then, you know, I was a judge last year, and I got to go and sample all the different things that the kids had made. It was pretty amazing. So I don't know a great deal about it, but I do know those programs are ongoing. Every time I've had the opportunity to meet Celeste, who's in charge of that effort for LPSS, I've been amazed at what she's doing. So I think if anybody's curious, she's the person to talk to. And then I'll stop talking in case anyone knows more than that.
Well, I'll just kind of echo. I mean, you're absolutely right. Celeste, again, just another amazing force. The amount of work she has to do kind of by herself, but the success that she's had in that role. Yeah, it's a very now, I don't know the current status. Of course, everything in the school system is I'm sure a bit shaken up. I personally don't have kids, so I don't have a direct knowledge of how things are going there. But up to the COVID point, it was very impressive. Not just the the amount of excitement and participation of the kids themselves, how much they were going along, enjoying the program, taking those lessons home. We heard so many great stories about, them, cooking for their family, these young kids. I mean, it's a great story on Celeste always brought great news. She was on our board for a long time, but things got a little bit too busy for her, understandably. But yeah, it continued to grow and get better. And aside from those programs, which LSU Ag has a big hand in helping with those gardens. They do a great job with their program. But Celeste was also able to get a lot of progress on the purchasing side of these schools and the cafeteria themselves, not just promoting on-site growing, which is awesome, but loosening up some of those restrictions on, why weren't we buying rice from a Louisiana farm for all these schools, and so it's been kind of baby steps in a way, but I know rice is one of the ingredients that's now able to be purchased from local farms. Sausage was another one that I remember offhand, but so there's been some progress, I guess, on the administrative side too, which is very nice to see. And hopefully as all the schools come back online, that's not something that gets, slipped through the cracks.
Yeah. And to echo that, I mean, we aren't working necessarily with the school board. We're on school board property with our urban farm, but we aren't connected directly with any school, but we love to. So maybe I should get Celeste in contact so we can get in Paulboro. But one of the things that we've been doing, because what we noticed very early on in our food justice work was that a lot of kids in our community and families were kind of leery to try new vegetables and new things that they may not be accustomed to. So if it's not a staple, if it's not cucumbers, bell peppers, maybe celery. I don't think we eat much raw celery in our community, but if it's not a staple or something that they were familiar with, people were kind of leery to try it. But with us growing things at the farm, we recognized that there was a steep education level that we needed to kind of overcome within our community. So we made efforts to make sure that when we did do cooking in the hood events, where we encouraged the community to come out, have fun, learn new recipes, play games with us, those things had to be accompanied with a cooking demonstration. Not that they had to be, but we thought it would be a lot easier to be able to show you how easy it is to chop zucchini and saute it in a pan with some onions, and then feed it to the kids, right? And then we had a personal experience that I could share, is that one little boy came with his mom. She was a single mother of 4. And the kids came and they were like, oh, what's this green stuff we have on the plate? And we had everything from the farm. We had okra, we had purple hull peas, we had greens, we had zucchini. Everything that we grew on the farm was on that plate. And those kids gobbled everything up. And then when they came back, one of them swore he lost 10 pounds. I mean, he was a stick already, but he swore he lost 10 pounds because he got to try a new food. And then their mom started cooking it for them on a regular basis. So what we try to do with McComb Veazey is to try to, treat the whole family and look at it holistically, and try to reinforce the things that they're learning in school and the things that we're trying to make sure we drive home with our young, but also making sure that we provide those resources to their parents and making sure that they have a good footing as well to be able to continue to reinforce what's happening at the school.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Once again, please feel free to unmute yourself or just place your question in the chat.
Hi, this is Jennifer Duce. I'm with TownFolk as well. And I just wanted to kind of put this out there that I think, there's strength in numbers, obviously. And we have worked with some of the organizations here tonight in the past, but I was just wondering if you guys think that, there might be a way for us to continue this conversation beyond tonight, and maybe work together to, like you mentioned earlier in the webinar, to bring this to the attention of the community, because I think there's such a divide in Lafayette between sort of the haves and the have-nots, and people are, very unaware of the challenges that are faced just, on the other side of town from where they live. But but also that we can just, you know, if we could get together and maybe pool our resources at times even, or you know, go collectively to maybe different farmers in the area where if they have extra produce or things that are available to possibly donate to our different organizations that where we can help get those things out through the programs that we already have in place. Anyway, I just would be interested to know if any of you guys, you know, have thought about that, or if you have any ideas or thoughts.
Well, and I'll jump in. One of the things we were hoping to really reignite this year, starting off last year with our the South Louisiana Food Summit was the Acadiana Food Alliance's kind of first significant seminar event that was also kind of piggybacked on the seafood cooking competition. But we had a very good, you know, gathering of people, and the idea was to just what is create those connections. Farmers, nonprofits, restaurants. You know, it's I guess you could say this about a lot of things, but yeah, it's like we need more connectivity. You know, kind of what you were touching on, that the haves and have nots. But the unfortunate thing, all those plans were kind of dashed this year. And we, you know, the board had discussions about the Zoom meetings. I'm a perfect example right now, or I really don't have the best technological availability. You know, is Zoom? You know, it's been a great placeholder this year, but there's just no true replacement for having you know, people in a room, looking at each other's faces and talking about, especially something that's, you know, it's a very much a shared passion. When I find, even it might be whether it's an, you know, an arch representative or any other nonprofit, you know, the idea of helping the community, that one thread is enough to kind of pull a real nice conversation together and come out with you know, some connections that you know, can help people, but also you know, have a very real financial impact too, in a very positive way. So, you know, we anxiously await the time where we can kind of get that back up and going. Acadiana Food Alliance will be hosting those kind of, you know, meetings again. I just hope it's sooner than later. It's just hard to tell, as we all know.
And I think to kind of echo a little bit of Max, but also to encourage that we do not have to be in a 10 by 20 room to have a conversation. We can meet outdoors. We can meet in large meeting conferences. But to answer your question, Jennifer, I think we're stronger together than we are apart. And I think it's important for us as nonprofits, working especially across different sectors that definitely intersect with each other at times, that we really, you know, be all on the same page in ways that we can come together and really uplift some of the issues that are happening within our community. And I really like what Max said about what the Acadiana Housing Alliance, I'm sorry, Food Alliance, wrong alliance. The Acadiana Food Alliance with trying to activate, you know, local staples into the work. And it sounds really familiar to what happens in New Orleans, what used to happen. Hopefully after COVID, it will continue with the Gulf States kind of challenge, where they encourage all of the Gulf States from Texas to Florida to enter a competition that supported only local produce, local seafood, local meats that come from our area. And I think if something like that was happening in Lafayette that supported more nonprofits that were working towards food insecurity, housing insecurity to address these issues, I think we can start seeing a larger push and a larger impact across our community. So definitely, I'm always down for a conversation. I'm always an email away, and if I can't be there, I'll send someone. So definitely, if y'all are interested in talking with McComb Veazey, is definitely on board.
Well, and before we end our conversation and Dr. Petrie provides the closing, I first would like to thank all of you for not only being here for this conversation, but for your work. I've been watching all of your work for some time now. So definitely thank y'all for that work in our community. Thank y'all so much. It's vital, it's important, and there are many of y'all out there. So definitely the nonprofit world, thank you so much, because the work that you do today, you did then, and you're doing in the future definitely means a lot in order to move our community forward, helping those who have been forgotten and moving us all together. Thank y'all so much for this work.
Yeah, just to echo what Trey said, for me, this was really great, and I definitely started a long time ago with working with civil society and nonprofit work, and so it's been nice for me to be able to hear everything you're doing and thinking about how the Gilbo Center for Public History can connect what we're doing with social justice for what you're doing on the ground. So I want to thank you all for taking the time with the limited bandwidth that you're working with to educate us, to educate all the students who will be watching this. And I really appreciate it. And I hope we can help to build up support. And I know that knowing what's going on locally with politics, working with cultural organizations, I know that there's a long struggle ahead, even just with what's happening with local government. So during these multiple crises that we are facing, the hill just seems to get bigger and bigger. And so I agree. I think it's important as ever for as many of us to group together and to show this is real. There is this real struggle, and you cannot ignore it. And as more and more people get together, that can't be ignored. So thank you so much. And thank you to Dean Kelman and the College of Liberal Arts and the university for helping to promote this event. And thank you to the participants who were able to join and ask great questions. So have a great night, have a great week, and good luck. And let us know if the Gilbo Center can do anything to help you. Bye.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so
Good
much.
night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you all
Night.
very much.
Thanks.